Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into something the sources are calling pretty critical, impacting, well, truly the future of humanity.
Wow. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a deep look at the challenges young men are facing right now. It's often framed as a crisis. We've gathered, a whole stack of material articles, some really striking research, and even things you, our listeners, sent in.
And look, this isn't just theoretical stuff. We're seeing reports like that Lost Boys, one from the UK Center of Social Justice, that apparently sent, well, shockwaves.
Right.
And while absolutely we've seen amazing progress for women, a huge collective victory, as one source puts it, the data we've looked at suggests men, especially in Western markets, might have fallen furthest fastest in certain areas.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Our mission today is really to go through these sources with you, pinpoint the key issues, try to understand, exactly why this is happening,
And importantly,
and explore what we can do about it. Think of this as your shortcut to getting genuinely well-informed on a subject that's, frankly, pretty complex.
exactly. We're trying to pull together all this different information, help you see the patterns, and really grasp why it matters.
Hmm.
And, just to be clear, we're presenting the ideas from the source material here impartially. We'll lay out what these articles and reports say, including any politically charged bits, but we're not endorsing any specific view ourselves, just showing you what's in the stack.
Absolutely. Transparency is key.
Hmm.
So, okay, where do we start? Those reports you mentioned, the ones raising alarms, the Lost Boys one sounds particularly intense. What are the main signals?
Well, it points to struggles pretty much across the board for young men. Things like difficulties in education, really alarmingly high suicide rates, trouble finding stable work,
Mm.
and also being more likely to get caught in crime. One detail from the source material that really hit me was about the CEO behind that report actually crying over the graphs.
Wow. That says a lot, doesn't it? About the human cost behind the numbers.
It really does.
So, what are some of the actual statistics the sources are highlighting?
Well, the numbers are pretty stark. For instance, a staggering 40% jump in young men, like 16 to 24, who are not in education employment. They call it NEET.
Percent increase. Wow.
Yeah, and research shows young women are now out earning young men, especially under 30 in cities. Though the sources do add some nuance there, it often shifts around age 30 or when kids arrive.
Oh, yeah.
And unemployment for young men cited as nearly twice the rate of women in some reports.
And education. That comes up a lot too, right?
Oh, definitely. It's a major focus. Like, while SAT scores might be similar on average, the sources point out that something like 70% of high school valedictorians are female.
70%.
Yeah, and women are much more likely to be in the top 10% of the class. One source kind of wonders if something in schools is prioritizing the female experience, or perhaps that women are better at that particular game.
Hmm. Interesting. And the suicide rates. That's probably the toughest statistic.
It is. It's truly devastating. Globally, around 75% of suicides are men. And it's the leading cause of death for young men under 15 inches, like 50 countries.
God, that's awful.
And the sources mention that suicide notes often contain words like worthless and useless, just gut-wrenching stuff.
Yeah, and that really connects to something a listener, Jeffrey, shared. He wrote about feeling like he could never earn my place in society and feeling just devastated. It's that same worthless, useless feeling the sources describe.
And that's the key point many sources make. These things, the stats, the struggles, there may be symptoms, not the cause.
Right.
They argue there's a deeper truth here, that too many boys are growing up without the guidance, discipline, and purpose they need.
Okay, so if those are the symptoms, let's dig into the causes the material explores. Education and the economy seem really intertwined here.
Totally. One big factor identified is the decline of vocational training, wood auto or metal shop type classes.
I remember those.
They've largely been replaced by things like computer science. And the argument is this leaves fewer clear paths for, well, the 2/3 of males that aren't going to end up with a traditional liberal arts college degree.
And some sources link that to this bigger idea of a winner-take-all economy. What's that about?
Right. The idea presented is that economic policies, and maybe higher education too, have sort of shifted focus. Instead of ensuring the bottom 90 have a shot, it's more about identifying and rewarding a kind of superclass of one percenters.
Concentrating opportunity at the top.
Exactly. The sources use examples like UCLA's acceptance rate plummeting from like 76% down to 9%. The claim is this crowds a massive amount of prosperity into the top 1%, leaving a lot of young people, maybe especially young men, not on that specific academic track, feeling kind of left out.
And this economic picture connects directly to changes in family structure, doesn't it?
Oh, hugely. The stats on fatherless homes are presented as a really major factor, a big increase in boys growing up without a father figure present.
How big an increase?
Well, the National Fatherhood Initiative in the U.S. says about 25% of kids live without a biological step or adoptive dad. And the U.S. actually has the world's highest rate of single-parent homes, 92% led by the mother.
Wow.
And the number of kids living just with their mom, it's basically doubled in the last 50-odd years. Went from 11% in 1968 to 21% in 2020.
Doubled. And the sources link this father absence to some pretty serious outcomes.
They do. Kids from father-absent homes are, according to this research, like 300% more likely to carry drugs or guns, deal drugs.
300%.
Yeah, and face a huge plethora of mental health consequences. It really makes you ask, like the material does, where are the fathers?
So why is that happening? Is it just men leaving?
Well, it's framed as more complex than that. Male abandonment is mentioned, sure, but also economic struggles making it harder for some dads to provide, or challenges with the family court system.
Right.
And also just the practical difficulty of having that spontaneous connection time, that garbage time when you don't live together. It's just harder.
The sources also bring up this interesting idea, the orchid or dandelion theory about boys and girls. Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's a metaphor. Boys are compared to orchids needing sort of more particular situations to grow and being more negatively impacted by bad environments.
Okay.
Whereas girls are likened to dandelions, maybe more resilient, able to thrive in more varied conditions. The argument presented is that boys might be less resilient to adversity.
And there's a tough statistic linked to that.
Yeah, a really difficult one. A boy who's sexually molested is apparently 6 to 10 times more likely to later commit suicide compared to a girl in the same situation.
Oh, God. That's just awful. And it highlights how traditional ideas might make it harder for boys to even talk about something like that.
Exactly. The sources point to the likely stigma, the historical pressure to never speak about it. They mention people like Lewis Howes sharing their stories as maybe a sign things are changing, but it's still a huge hurdle for many.
We also got that anecdote from a teacher in Germany
Mm-hmm.
that seemed relevant to early school experiences.
Yes, she talked about young boys having this energy to destroy the classroom dynamics.
Right.
And she linked it to a lack of boundaries at home, but also, significantly, unsupervised, unlimited access to all kinds of content on the internet, e.g. porn. The concern being that their perception of what is okay and what is right becomes completely distorted.
And the classroom environment itself comes under scrutiny in the sources.
It does. Things like single-sex boys' schools often having double the amount of recess, kind of like that saying, a happy dog is a tired dog, you know?
Yeah.
Boys needing more physical outlets.
Makes sense.
But a really big point is the lack of male teachers, especially in the early years and after school. One source puts it bluntly, there are more female fighter pilots per capita than male kindergarten teachers.
Wow, that's a statistic.
It means for some boys, their first male role model might actually be a prison guard, which is just a crushing thought.
So when you step back, it's this whole constellation of things, isn't it? Socioeconomic pressures, maybe biological differences in resilience, losing vocational training, jobs being outsourced, economies not growing like they used to in some places.
Like the UK example mentioned.
Right. And this real theme of, like, a lack of male involvement in kids' lives. The sources literally talk about communities where it's like, where are the men? Not at work, not in college, maybe just online.
That sense of absence, yeah. It's a powerful thread running through all this.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit. How is all this impacting relationships? The sources mention a dating crisis, even a huge mating gap.
Yeah, this part often circles back to the idea of hypergamy.
Which is?
It's described as the traditional tendency for women to sort of seek partners with more economic or social status. Now, women earning more is obviously a fantastic development, a wonderful thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when you combine that with this traditional preference, the sources argue it creates huge ramifications for dating today.
And that's where we see that reverse gender gap data, women under 30 out-earning men. men in some cities.
Exactly. But again, the sources add nuance. It often flips around age 30, especially with kids, and they argue that corporate structures have really failed to support women's careers post-motherhood.
So income plays this really tricky role now.
It seems so. The material cites research suggesting relationships become twice as likely to get divorced if the woman starts earning more.
Twice as likely. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe connected, men in that situation are apparently 3 times as likely to use ED drugs. The sources link this to a potential loss of purpose and self-esteem for some men. The argument put forward is if women step up economically, men need to step up more logistically.
And then there's the high heels effect. I assume that's not literally about shoes.
No. It's about height preferences in dating. The idea that many women prefer not to date men shorter than them. Estimates vary wildly in the sources, 50%, 80%. But the point is, given height distributions, it significantly shrinks the potential dating pool for many men.
And dating apps make this even more pronounced.
That's the argument. Filters for height can perpetuate this issue, meaning lots of men just don't even show up in searches.
Right.
The result described is this situation where all of the women want the same few guys and they shut out the rest. A kind of winner-take most, if not all, environment.
Well, which sounds great for some guys, but...
Yeah, amazing for attractive guys, but a disaster for many others. And interestingly, the sources say it's also mildly shittier for every woman because of the increased competition. The conclusion drawn is pretty stark. The digitization of mating has been bad for women. It's been disastrous for men.
Disastrous. That's heavy. The sources also talk about dating paradoxes. What are those?
2 main ones are highlighted. First, as women take on more provider roles, they understandably need more emotional support. But, the argument goes, many men were raised not to be emotionally intelligent. The source uses this analogy. Emotional intelligence is the new currency, but while women are maybe in graduate school for emotional talks, many men are still back in 3rd grade.
Okay, that's one paradox.
Yeah.
The second.
The second is that women ask men to be more open emotionally, but then sometimes men get shamed when they do that. There's a quote cited. "A woman would rather see me die on the white horse than fall off of it." It's illustrated with this story about a woman ending things after a guy shared something deeply vulnerable about his mom's suicide attempt. It suggests some women want support for themselves, but maybe aren't equipped for the full weight of a man's vulnerability.
Which leads to that marketing idea mentioned, consumer dissonance.
Exactly. The gap between what people say they want versus what they actually choose. In dating, the sources suggest women might articulate wanting emotionally available men, but often find themselves still very attracted to traditional masculine attributes.
And the online dating experience itself. The numbers sound pretty brutal for the average guy.
Yeah, the stats are kind of shocking. Like an average guy on Tinder might need 200 right swipes for one coffee date.
200.
And with high ghosting rates, maybe 1,000 swipes per coffee date that actually happens. The sources argue this constant rejection is incredibly demoralizing and can push guys towards, well, misogynistic content or just blaming other people.
Which could feed into that idea of men opting out of society.
It seems connected. That stat about 1 in 7 young men in the UK is NEET, not in education, employment, or training, is seen as evidence. And when traditional role models are absent, guys might look online and find figures like Andrew Tate, who the sources clearly view as problematic, but who seem to offer some kind of guidance.
And all this seems to be driving down relationship formation overall.
Looks like it. Marriage rates are nearing the lowest rate in American history. Birth rates have dropped 20% in 20 years.
Yeah.
And that matters because statistically, married people tend to be healthier, wealthier, and marriage is linked to lower rates of child poverty. The sources even suggest marriage is becoming a kind of luxury item for higher earners.
There's also that weird disconnect about who thinks the other gender has more power in relationships.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Similar percentages of men and women actually believe the other side holds more power. Strange symmetry there.
And this starts young, right? Fewer teens are dating.
Way fewer. Like under 50% of teen boys now have had a relationship compared to maybe 75% in previous generations. The concern raised is they're missing out on developing basic relational skills.
So by the time they're 30.
Yeah, by 30, never having been in a relationship is starting to be seen as a red flag by potential partners, according to the sources.
Okay, beyond dating, what about other tech and cultural impacts? Porn comes up a lot.
It does. The scale is massive, like 30% of all internet traffic, with 80% of that attributed to men.
30%. Wow.
And the sources mention correlations between high consumption and depression. There's discussion of no-fap communities, and this idea that readily available porn might take away a man's mojo, his drive to pursue real, messy, difficult relationships, because it offers a reasonable facsimile of life on a screen.
That makes me think of that anecdote about working at Google, selling porn ads, and feeling uneasy about what was being perpetuated.
Right. And looking forward, the sources are already talking about AI relationships. Ads for things like Replica promising the perfect AI boyfriend.
AI boyfriends.
Yeah. The appeal is clear, right?
Yeah.
Real relationships are messy. And AI doesn't nag, only tells you how great you are. Project that out to realistic sex robots, and the sources speculate about a future where emotional and sexual needs might be met digitally, reducing the incentive to take real-world social risks.
This comes back to that idea of rejection resilience.
Exactly. The suggestion is that maybe Gen Z daters lack this. There are anecdotes about students needing super precise instructions to avoid any chance of failure or, crying over feedback on a Google Doc. The argument is pretty simple. Anything worth having is worth taking a risk for, and dating is all about risk and potential failure.
And the pandemic probably didn't help build those social muscles either.
Definitely not. The sources say people who came of age during lockdowns missed out on critical moments of becoming a human, and it's noticeable in workplaces and dating.
Okay, here's a curveball from the sources, almost a Molotov cocktail. The idea that maybe too little drinking is an enemy of mating.
Yeah, that one definitely stands out. It's presented as counterintuitive. The argument is that alcohol can be a social lubricant, helping people lower their inhibitions, which might actually be helpful in dating scenarios.
Interesting.
This is contrasted with Gen Z often being described as, well, less into heavy drinking, much less expensive, and generally showing less risk-taking behavior, getting licenses later, losing virginity later.
But surely less risk-taking is good.
In many ways, absolutely. Fewer car accidents, for example. But the counterpoint raised is whether people are missing out on the experience to make mistakes. Mistakes that are often part of learning and growing.
Right?
Plus, there's the whole surveillance culture factor, cameras everywhere, social media making everyone maybe a bit more cautious.
Okay, so we've outlined the problems, the potential causes, the impacts. What do the sources offer as solutions? What advice is there for young men listening?
Well, one framework presented, attributed to someone named Scott, is described as simple but hard. It starts with finding, say, 8 to 12 hours of capital time each week.
Okay, find the time. Where from?
He suggests it's so easy to find, just in TikTok, for many basically, cut down screen time. Then reinvest that time capital into 3 key areas.
What are they?
First, working out and getting fit. Just lean into that. Be strong. The argument isn't just physical, it's about being mentally healthy, even kinder. He talks about being able to break up fights, defend the country, just feeling fucking amazing.
So physical fitness linked to mental well-being and confidence. Got it. Second,
Start making money. Become economically viable. Not necessarily rich now, but having a plan, showing discipline, building financial confidence. He puts it bluntly. Economic viability affects a man's opportunities, his sexual currency, his place in society. It is the way the world is, according to this perspective, even while lamenting that character is being squeezed out by money.
okay, fitness and finance.
Third, demonstrate kindness, framed as a kind of secret weapon.
Yeah.
Small things matter. Good manners, thoughtfulness, how you treat service staff, your parents, treating people well, even with no reciprocal expectation.
Kindness is a strength. I like that. Someone else, Logan, adds a couple more points.
Yeah, Logan suggests 2 additional things. 1, develop passions and learn to talk about them. Like the example given of Sam Parr and his interest in denim women are drawn to guys with genuine interests.
Makes you more interesting, right?
Exactly. And 2, have a growth mindset. Actively work on yourself. The idea is women see potential, they see a great path ahead if you're committed to self-improvement.
And Logan also stresses that women aren't expecting the impossible.
Right. It's not about flying them to the moon, it's about effort. Remembering a friend's name, texting after they had a tough meeting, planning a thoughtful, simple date. The sources suggest men can get much farther than they think just by doing these bare minimum things that maybe other guys aren't.
This all seems to point towards needing a new way to think about masculinity itself.
That's definitely a theme. The need for a new definition for modern masculinity, maybe mature masculinity or evolved masculinity. Not feminine, but modern masculine, decisive, able to provide, and able to communicate emotionally.
And one concrete suggestion that comes up is men's groups.
Yes, that's mentioned quite a bit. There's an anecdote about David Clavin's group meeting monthly, sharing struggles, what am I struggling with, holding each other accountable. The sources argue this provides a crucial masculine space, offering different advice than maybe a partner would. It contrasts with typical male friendships where guys might not talk about feeling depressed or lonely for fear of appearing weak.
And there's even a theory about why men might need that side-by-side connection.
Yeah, sort of an evolutionary angle, men sitting together, conversations on the savannah, that kind of thing. The sources note the decline of traditional in-person male groups, churches, Elks clubs, veterans groups,
Right.
and argue that online interaction, like catching up, playing video games, or watching streamers while connecting, is not the same thing as that physical co-presence.
The sources also talk about relationships, often with women, acting as guardrails for men.
They do, sometimes drawing on personal experience. The observation is women often build wider social networks, while men without a partner might become more isolated, turning to things like video games, Reddit, maybe porn.
What about that idea of women raising men in relationships? Sounds a bit controversial.
The sources acknowledge the phrasing isn't great, but argue partners do shape each other. There's an element of raising each other. Having someone to talk to at night is presented as incredibly valuable compared to single friends going home alone. Building relational skills takes time, and the starting late is tough.
Here's an interesting one. Reading fiction as a way for men to build empathy.
Yeah, framed as an underappreciated resource. The idea is fiction lets you get inside the mind of somebody else,
Right.
which contrasts with the nonfiction men often read: money, business, fitness. The suggestion is almost tactical. Reframe reading fiction as helping you get laid or, just making you a better person, giving you perspective by reading authors different from, you say, a book by a woman if you're a single guy struggling.
That's a novel idea, pun intended.
Yeah.
And someone shared a personal story about that.
Yes, about reading John Irving novels and feeling less weird or alone as a young person. There's strong agreement in the sources that TikTok is not going to give you the empathy you get from reading a good novel.
Hearing those listener quotes again, Liam, Jeffrey feeling worthless, meaningless, unable to talk, it really brings it back to needing spaces where men can express vulnerability without feeling, well, emasculated.
Absolutely. And that brings us to therapy, which is stressed as vital. That Kumail Nanjiani anecdote is powerful. Learning his sadness came out as anger because he wouldn't let himself feel sad. Therapy is presented as necessary because, frankly, a life sucks if you can't cry, you can't express emotions, you don't have people to talk to. But the sources also note how hard it is for men to seek help, feeling it's unmanly, drawing on personal accounts. That numbness learned in high-stress jobs, it doesn't work for emotional healing.
Okay, so individual actions are important. What about bigger systemic solutions mentioned?
Several ideas pop up. More vocational programming, maybe some form of national service to build identity and purpose. Israel's model is mentioned.
Right.
Also, creating more freshman seats at colleges and fostering more third places community spots for connection outside work and home.
It sounds like the person collating these sources was getting a lot of tough emails from young men.
Yeah, that comes through. A sense of being overwhelmed, wishing for an AI filter to direct guys to help. Mentioning giving therapy funds to some. There's a clear call for assembling a resource list. Good podcasts, books, healthy male role models, asking, who are the guys that are saying healthy things?
And building on that, there's this idea of writing a new script for men, since old ones from religion or institutions might feel lost.
It's a great metaphor. What's in the new script? Suggestions include humor, confidence, posture, manners, fitness, gym, financial planning, conflict resolution, listening, being a protector.
Protector.
Yeah, like a default protective instinct for anyone more vulnerable, defending people verbally or physically, and also being a procreator, actually wanting relationships, taking risks, initiating contact, framing that desire as a positive, wonderful thing.
It sounds almost remedial, needing to teach men to want relationships.
That's the sobering point made. Evolutionarily, all of our software is towards procreation, but the argument is people are maybe sick from food, meds, porn, tech, to the point where this fundamental drive needs explicit encouragement and teaching.
But it feels like maybe the conversation is shifting, that people are noticing.
The sources suggest so. A governor focusing on young men is cited as a sign people are feeling it on the
Hmm.
ground. And the crucial message repeated is, women don't have to do worse when men do better, and vice versa. The goal is to raise up everyone.
So what's the cost if we don't address this? What are the societal stakes?
Well, the economic impacts are starkly presented. That ratio of workers to seniors shrinking from maybe 12.1 down towards 3.1.
Hmm.
Without higher birth rates, that points to economic decline.
Like South Korea.
Exactly. South Korea is used as the prime example. Rock bottom birth rate, contracting economy, even struggling to maintain military size.
And there's a political angle mentioned too.
Yes, linking young men's struggles to a trend of them leaning more right-leaning and more conservative. The argument presented is that the left hasn't necessarily offered the best vision of masculinity, leaving an opening. The groups apparently shifting fastest are Latinos and people under the age of 30, especially males, who are not doing very well. The sources suggest it's often driven by mothers seeing their sons struggle mothers, worried about her kids, caring less about abstract politics and more about, my son isn't doing well.
Which leads to advice for parents listening now.
Yeah, direct advice. First, forgive yourself. It's complex. Second, actively try to get male men involved in his life. A coach, uncle, family friend.
Find those role models.
Exactly. A personal story is shared about a mother making sure her son had sports, had men around. The key failure point identified is when a boy loses a male role model.
And a final challenging thought for sons about their moms.
Just the idea that your mother might be the only person in your life ever that wants you to be more successful than you, so don't treat her like the enemy. There's reflection on past shame about treating one's own mother poorly.
Wow. We have really covered a huge amount of territory here. From the signs of this crisis, the incredibly complex web of causes, economic, educational, family, dating through to these potential ways forward for individuals in society. Well, it's a lot, all drawn from these sources.
And those potential solutions, men's groups, therapy, even reading fiction, building skills, that idea of a resource list, they give you concrete things to think about, maybe act on. It definitely makes you reflect on your own life and the young men you know, doesn't it?
This material has certainly generated a huge conversation. And I keep coming back to that line, women don't have to do worse when men do better and vice versa. That feels like the goal, right? For everyone to be thriving.
Absolutely. And it leaves you with a final thought to chew on, If we're at a point where we actually need to teach young men the basics of wanting relationships, wanting connection, even procreation, what does that signal about the fundamental health of our society? How do we make sure progress for one group doesn't accidentally create huge hurdles for another? How do we find solutions that genuinely benefit everyone?
A really profound question to end on. Thank you for joining us on this really important deep dive. We hope it's given you a clearer picture and maybe some things to explore further. Until next time, keep using these deep dives as your shortcut to being well informed.